On August 7, 1992, a loving wife was kidnapped from her own home. This happened in the small community of EADS, Tennessee. The local residents were terrified, and her family was devastated. The FBI tried to outsmart the kidnapper, but their only lead was a ransom call. An unknown man called the victim's husband and said that if he didn't meet all his demands, he would split her head open. EADS is a small settlement about a half-hour drive from Memphis. In 1992, its population was about 500 to 600 people, no more. Essentially, it was a rural area where everyone knew each other. There were no crimes in EADS, so when tragedy struck on August 7, 1992, the locals couldn't believe it. Martha Roberts, affectionately called DOE by her family and friends, married Alan Roberts in 1948. They had no children. The couple owned several successful businesses in Memphis. Eventually, they sold everything and bought 60 hectares of land in EADS. They built a house there and lived a quiet, peaceful life. They were an incredible couple. In terms of their relationship, they were a perfect match. Doe was very kind and always eager to help anyone in need. That day, Alan had no idea that Friday, August 7th, would turn into a nightmare for him. He had a scheduled meeting to show a potential buyer one of his properties. Alan left for the meeting at 10 a.m. He was preparing the house to make it more presentable, but the person he was waiting for never showed up. Around 5 or 5:30 p.m., Alan finished working and returned home. He immediately noticed something strange. The garage door was open, but the car was in place. Doe's bicycle was also standing nearby, which seemed ODD. Alan went inside and started looking for his wife, but she was nowhere to be found. When he saw Doe's inhaler on the kitchen table, he panicked because she was asthmatic and had been hospitalized several times. Doe couldn't live without her medication. Naturally, Alan was alarmed. It was already evening, and he began calling friends and acquaintances, unsure where his wife could have gone. Alan was about to call the police when he received shocking news. That evening, the kidnapper called him. He threatened Alan, saying that if he didn't meet his demands, he would kill Doe. The kidnapper demanded a ransom of $100,000. Quickly realizing the seriousness of the situation, Alan turned on the answering machine to record the call. But the kidnapper was one step ahead. It seemed as if he was nearby and could see every move Alan made. The kidnapper ordered Alan to take the cassette out of the answering machine and destroy it. Without asking any questions, Alan did exactly as he was told. After that, Alan immediately called the police. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police, the sheriff, and FBI agents arrived on the scene. The FBI agents inspected all the doors and windows in the house for signs of forced entry, but found nothing. There were no signs of a struggle, either inside the house or outside. Nothing seemed suspicious. The first thing the investigators needed to confirm was whether this was truly a kidnapping. Officers began questioning Alan, asking what the kidnapper said and how he sounded. But Alan remained silent. He sat still, staring at a single point, unwilling to speak. Eventually, Alan tried to describe the kidnapper's call. He said that a man with a foreign accent had called, claiming he had taken Doe and demanded $100,000, instructing him not to contact the police. However, something in his story bothered the FBI agents. It was very unusual that the kidnapper hadn't provided detailed instructions on how to deliver the ransom. Typically, kidnappers always have clear plans for collecting money. But the officers and agents couldn't understand this particular kidnapper's motive. First, they began questioning every family member to rule them out as suspects. In this case, Alan Roberts was the last person to see his wife Doe and the only one who had spoken to the kidnapper. The FBI started investigating everything about Mr. Roberts, his personality, life, and social status. Meanwhile, the search for Doe continued. That year, kidnappings were extremely rare, and the idea of a kidnapping in EADS was unimaginable, making the case even more mysterious. No one understood what had happened to Doe. Alan Roberts, on the other hand, hoped that the kidnapper would call again and give instructions on where to deliver the $100,000. However, Alan had no idea that the FBI had its own suspicions about the kidnapper's identity. They knew that in most cases, the primary suspect is someone who had a close relationship with the victim. To test the theory that Alan Roberts could be the kidnapper, the FBI installed surveillance devices. Agents placed bugs throughout the house to listen in on everything. They also stationed agents at the Roberts home in case the kidnapper called again. While Allen and the FBI waited for the kidnapper's call, a neighbor reported seeing something suspicious. She claimed to have seen a white Winnebago van entering and leaving the settlement. The officers realized they needed to find the van immediately. They drove along the highway from West Memphis, Arkansas, to Jackson, Tennessee, and eventually spotted a white van at a roadside motel. The officers knocked on the window and said they needed to search the vehicle. Naturally, the owners were unhappy, but they allowed the search. It turned out that they were not locals, but had gotten lost while traveling. They admitted to driving through Eads, but it soon became clear that this lead was a dead end. Everyone was disappointed that the van owners had no connection to Doe's kidnapping, as everyone was desperate for her safe return. Meanwhile, the police continued searching the area around the Roberts house, both from the air with helicopters and on the ground, hoping to find any clues. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing. The day after Doe's disappearance, FBI agents resumed questioning Allen Roberts about his whereabouts on the day of the incident. Their suspicions of Allen grew stronger. It appeared that he was the last person to see Doe that morning before he left for work. Naturally, he became the prime suspect. Allen told the FBI that a man named Sam Wagner from Indiana had called his wife the day before her abduction, claiming he was interested in purchasing a property from the Roberts. Doe noted that the man had a thick accent and spoke poorly. This detail gave the FBI a new lead. Both the kidnapper and the supposed buyer, who never showed up for the meeting with Allen, had thick accents. From that moment on, the FBI began investigating Sam Wagner from Indiana. Who was he? They needed to find out everything they could about him. However, it turned out that no such person existed. There was no Sam Wagner in Indiana. No one by that name was known in the area as someone interested in buying land. He seemed to be a ghost. This only increased the FBI's suspicions of Allen. Days passed and the kidnapper never made contact again. So Allen decided to act. On Tuesday, he issued a statement asking the kidnapper to reach out so he could hand over the ransom. 3 days later, still without any contact, he offered a reward. Despite the FBI's objections, Allen held a press conference, announcing that he was willing to pay anyone who could help him find Doe. Roberts was a wealthy man, able to offer a generous reward of $10,000. It was a significant sum, and he believed that money might motivate someone to speak up about Doe's whereabouts. Time went by, but nothing happened. FBI agents had been stationed at the Roberts house for several days. Since the kidnapper didn't call, they had no leads. They left the house and set up a headquarters in Eads, where they could discuss the investigation without fear of being overheard by Mr. Roberts or anyone else. All the FBI's actions indicated that Allen was the prime suspect until the phone rang again. One evening in early October, Allen's phone rang. It was the kidnapper speaking with a thick accent. He instructed Allen to find a payphone at a specific address. Allen immediately went to the location and answered the call. This time, the kidnapper demanded $185,000 in cash. Everyone hoped that this time the kidnapper would give clear instructions on how to exchange the money for Doe, but their hopes were dashed. He didn't provide any specific time or place for the handover. The FBI suspected that Allen himself might be behind the kidnapping, as they had no direct evidence that the kidnapper actually existed. Allen, on the other hand, ignored these suspicions and continued appealing to the kidnapper. On camera, he didn't appear in the best light. Without knowing what he was going through and how difficult it was for him, one might have assumed he was guilty. As time passed, Allen became more and more despondent. He wasn't on the brink of collapse, but he was in terrible shape. He had lost his sense of purpose and didn't know how to carry on. His condition worsened, and at some point, Allen realized he desperately needed human interaction. He started inviting women out for dinner and movies, and even went dancing with them. Naturally, this sparked gossip. Many members of the church community, especially the women, found this behavior unacceptable. They began speculating that he might have had girlfriends and that he had been unfaithful to Doe. Someone said something, another person added to it, a third retold it, and so on. Rumors spread throughout the community. Only a few parishioners and relatives believed that Allen shouldn't stay home and avoid socializing with people. A so-called casserole club emerged, as Allen himself called it. This club consisted of women who were concerned about him and brought him food. A whole line of women eager to comfort Alan formed outside his house. These women genuinely cared about him and tried to feed him because Doe was no longer around. But in the eyes of most people, it looked different. He was alone. His wife had been kidnapped, and yet he was socializing with other women. Naturally, people started gossiping and speculating about his behavior. They discussed his actions and conduct in the local community. Due to Alan's social activity, the FBI began to suspect him even more. However, it was too early to confront him directly. In the winter of '93, several people in Eads reported being contacted by someone speaking with a strong accent. Among them was Melinda Lancaster, a friend of Doe. She reached out to the FBI and said she wanted to address the kidnapper on behalf of Doe. Melinda asked the kidnapper to tell her where she could deliver the ransom. She believed the kidnapper no longer wanted to communicate with Alan Roberts and wanted to try to lure him out by convincing him that he would definitely get the money if he revealed Doe's location. However, the caller never gave clear instructions on what to do with the money. Instead, he started calling various residents of the town. He claimed that Alan didn't care about his wife, that he only cared about the money and nothing else. The FBI stated that they would prefer to speak directly with the missing woman instead of the mysterious kidnapper. They wanted him to let her speak to someone who could confirm her voice. But the mysterious kidnapper never gave clear instructions or said when he planned to release Doe. All this terrified the residents of Eads. Imagine someone calmly watching TV in the evening, and suddenly the phone rings, and a stranger accuses Mr. Roberts of being a scoundrel, claiming that he hired the kidnappers himself and kidnapped his own wife. The caller stated that Alan refused to hand over the ransom. Because of this, some members of the local church organized a fundraiser to pay the ransom for Roberts' wife. When the kidnapper began calling local residents and saying that Alan didn't want to pay, people started to think and discuss the possibility that he might actually be involved in the abduction. Charles Lord, the head of the church and Alan's most loyal supporter, also began to have doubts. He revealed that Mr. Roberts and his wife had marital problems and that Alan had been unfaithful to her. The FBI immediately intensified their investigation of Alan. They interrogated him for hours, asking the same questions repeatedly, and he kept giving the same answers. Alan said that at some point, he stopped understanding what was really going on. One day, FBI agents brought an excavator to the place where he used to burn garbage. They dug a large hole hoping to find something, but there was nothing there except trash. Although the police couldn't prove Alan was involved in Doe's disappearance, the local community already considered him guilty. Everyone thought Alan had something to do with it, which was a real punishment for his family. Alan sank deeper into depression, and his relatives grew concerned. One day he told his nephew that he didn't know how much longer he could endure it. He felt drained and wanted it all to end. Though he didn't say he wanted to die, his nephew, just in case, took away all the guns from his house to prevent him from harming himself. Then the kidnapper made an unexpected move. On March 4, 1993, he called a local news channel. The journalist who answered the call had a tape recorder on his desk. He turned on the speakerphone and recorded the conversation. The kidnapper said that Roberts' wife was gone. She had died that morning. The journalist tried to keep the caller on the line for as long as possible, hoping to hear background noises or any clue that might help. But the caller kept repeating that Doe Roberts was dead. The journalist began asking how they could verify it, where she was, and how they could get more information. The kidnapper angrily said the man was too curious. He wanted to speak, not answer questions. Then the kidnapper hung up. The next day he called again, but this time he said that Doe was alive. He completely changed his story. During the conversation, the journalist asked where they should deliver the money. For the first time during the entire investigation, the kidnapper provided a specific date and location. They were supposed to deliver the ransom at a large local shopping center. He insisted that Alan be the one to deliver the money. However, Alan didn't want to go alone, so he took his nephew with him. They drove to the shopping center parking lot and waited. At the same time, undercover police officers were also on the parking lot, recording license plates. This was a pivotal moment. However, the kidnapper never showed up. The next person to receive a message from the kidnapper was Charles Lord, the Roberts neighbor. But this time, instead of phone calls, he received a letter from someone claiming to have kidnapped and held Doe. Since he reported receiving letters, Officers installed surveillance cameras disguised as birdhouses across from the mailbox to track who was delivering them. Yet every time someone came to drop off a letter, the cameras mysteriously stopped working and no recordings were made. The officers were frustrated. They believed they had lost a chance to identify Doe Roberts' kidnapper. In the summer of '93, some members of Doe's family gathered to try to figure out who might be behind the kidnapping. Her nephews, William Powell and Larry Knox, were very upset that the FBI and police weren't giving them any updates, so they started their own investigation. They suspected one person and came up with a plan. They gave this person a phone number known only to the three of them. They wanted to see if the kidnapper would call that number. It was one of the brothers' numbers, which wasn't listed in the phone directory. And indeed, the next day, the kidnapper called that very unlisted number. The Knox brothers believed they had found the kidnapper and arranged a meeting with him at a motel to hand over the ransom. They placed bundles of cash on the bed, covered it with a sheet, and waited. After 45 minutes, there was a knock on the door. It was Charles Lord. They had already suspected him, and seeing him at the door, they barely restrained themselves from attacking him. Lord was a highly respected figure in the local Methodist church. He was respected by many residents of Itza. Sensing something was wrong, Charles claimed he came to help. He asked them to give him the money so he could hand it over to the kidnapper and bring Doe home. The Knox brothers refused, but then Lord made a mistake. The brothers had received clear instructions from the kidnapper about who should be in the motel room. Their mother was supposed to deliver the money, but the brothers decided it was too dangerous. Lord told the Knox brothers, "Why are you here? Your mother is supposed to be here." They immediately asked him how he knew that, as only the kidnapper had that information. At that moment, Charles Lord lost his temper. He got furious, a fight broke out, and eventually Lord ran out of the motel. The brothers immediately reported him to the FBI. The FBI agents acted quickly, hoping Doe was still alive. Without definitive proof that the victim was dead, they assumed she was alive and did everything possible to save her. After consulting with the Mutual Aid Fund staff, the officers discovered that Mr. Lord had taken a large loan, $200,000 or even $300,000 by forging documents. They also analyzed his financial records and found that he had been embezzling church funds. He had stolen at least $14,000. It turned out that no one except the church accountant knew about this. That's when the FBI stumbled upon an interesting detail. Doe had taken over bookkeeping, which Lord had been handling before her. He didn't want her to uncover his schemes. The FBI confronted Charles Lord with everything they had found. He was brought in for questioning, and he immediately confessed to kidnapping and killing Doe. During the interrogation, he described what had happened on August 7, 1992, the day Doe went missing, and admitted that his motive was money. He introduced himself as Sam Wagner and arranged to meet Mr. Roberts at 10 a.m. to look at a plot of land Roberts was selling. Lord knew that Mr. Allen would not be home. To kidnap Mrs. Roberts, he came to her house and told her that her husband had been in an accident and she needed to go with him to the hospital. After Mrs. Roberts got into his car, Lord drove her to his house and took her to the room above his garage. Charles admitted that before suffocating Doe with a pillow, he raped her, and all this time, his wife was downstairs. No matter how many times they asked him about his motive, he consistently said it was all about money, but he never gave clear instructions on where or how to hand over the ransom. The officers believed that Charles wanted to control the investigation. He seemed to take pleasure in what was happening in the town. That was his ransom. However, they still didn't know where Doe Roberts' body was and wanted to find out. Lord told them he had disposed of the body by throwing it into the river. Divers searched for Doe Roberts' body and her personal belongings all day, but found nothing. That's when the FBI realized he had lied about throwing her body into the river. Investigators spoke with his lawyers, who said they were tired of his endless games and that Charles Lord needed to tell the truth if he wanted to reduce his sentence. The lawyer prepared an agreement. If Lord revealed the location of the body and admitted his guilt, the state would not seek the death penalty. In the end, Lord confessed. He had buried Doe Roberts' body in his yard on the night of the kidnapping. He had dug the grave 2 weeks before committing the crime. Charles Lord buried her body under a fresh compost pile, then poured lime over it and sealed it with concrete. When the police exhumed the body, they found it well preserved. Her hands were raised toward her face. It was possible that when he buried Doe, she was still alive. On September 16, 1993, Charles Lord was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. He was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 20 years for the rape. After spending a whole year under suspicion of murdering his beloved wife, Alan Roberts was finally exonerated. He decided to move away. After Charles Lord was sentenced, Alan Roberts went to the local Methodist church and gave a speech. He openly expressed how hurt and disappointed he was that they had all turned against him. He asked to have his name removed from the list of parishioners, then turned around and walked out of the church, never to return. Alan left Itza. In 1994, he married Esther Hammonds, one of his supporters during Doe's disappearance. He lived happily for the rest of his life. As for Charles Lord, he spent the remainder of his life in prison, where he eventually died. In other words, justice was served. Friends, what do you think about this horrific case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more stories like this.